Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 579 for the 17th of November 2019. Richard Saunders coming to you once again from Sydney, Australia. Today on the Skeptic Zone, a most remarkable story and a warning. We're going to begin with the case of an anti-vaxxer conspiracy theorist who has gone into a medical clinic in Melbourne and had them remove pro-vaccination posters from the wall. Sounds like some warped reality, some bad dream. It really did happen, and the details are coming up at the top of the show. And it certainly is a cautionary tale, a warning, and I think this story will continue to unfold in the coming weeks. Following that, it's our old friend Ian Bryce, the challenge coordinator and investigator here at Australian Skeptics. Recently, the Australian Skeptics have been putting together a series of video interviews with prominent skeptics, including one of our founders, Dick Smith. They're all up on YouTube now. Link in this week's show notes, but I thought I'd play to you some of the interview with Ian Bryce as he recounts some of the investigations that he took part in the early 80s. Good old-fashioned skepticism. Following that, I tell the audience at Sydney's Skeptics in the Pub about the upcoming Bent Spoon Award, which will be at Skepticon, which will be announced at Skepticon in Melbourne. We look at some of this year's nominations, and one in particular, a man who claims he can make it rain. Then I chat to Tim Mendham, the editor of The Skeptic, the Journal of Australian Skeptics, about what it's like to gather stories for the magazine, and then you'll hear Tim read out part 2 of the continuing series, The Hole in the Pole. Well, that's enough for me at the moment. Maud the cat has joined me here in the studio. Hey, what are you looking at? Hey! Are you looking for a bird out the window or something? I better take her downstairs and give her some dinner, I think. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Over the years, one of the topics that the Skeptic Zone has continually had to face, cover, report on, comment on, investigate anti-vaxxers, and of course they are intermingled with conspiracy theorists. I think you almost need to be a conspiracy theorist to really be a true diehard anti-vaxxer. And once you become a staunch conspiracy theorist, I guess it's like any strong belief, you feel entitled to do things. A case in point, and a video that's come to the attention of the Australian Skeptics in the last few days, where an anti-vaxxer / conspiracy theorist walks into a medical centre here in Australia and demands they take posters off the wall. These posters are for vaccination, flu vaccination, whooping cough, and so on. And I read from a story published in The Age newspaper online, dated the 14th of November, a person posing as a Therapeutics Goods Administration official has walked into a Melbourne health clinic and demanded vaccination posters be removed. The Commonwealth Agency says it is aware of the impersonation and warned anyone else thinking of trying the trick would be breaking the law. Quote, impersonating Commonwealth public officials is a criminal offence, end quote, the Therapeutics Goods Administration said in a statement on Thursday. Quote, we advise individuals who may be encouraged to impersonate an officer of the TGA that this is a serious criminal offence that may lead to prosecution, end quote. The The health regulator said it broadly prohibits the advertising of prescription medicines, including vaccines, but it is not the case when the medication is authorized or required by a government authority. Quote, posters relating to vaccines and vaccination sanctioned by the Australian Government Department of Health under the National Immunisation Program are permitted, end quote, it said. Quote, as part of an important public health campaign, this material is appropriate and legal and provides important health information to consumers. If clinics and health professionals produce their own public information materials, we advise focusing on services rather than specific products to avoid a breach of advertising requirements, end quote. A short story gets to the point that it is not illegal for these posters to be displayed in the health clinics. Now, this is what this anti-vaxxer / conspiracy theorist did play on when he walked into the clinic, brandishing documents from the Therapeutics Goods Administration outlining the part of the legislation or the law where it says these clinics may not post material that is illegal. Well, the problem is, of course, those posters were perfectly legal, and this person was blustering, and according to the newspaper here, in their report, impersonating a Therapeutics Goods Administration official. Now, how do we know all this? Because the person involved, who I won't name at the moment, filmed it all from his perspective using either a handheld smartphone facing away from him or maybe a camera pinned to his chest or something like that. Now, did we come by this film from some whistleblower or sneaky source or something like that? No, it was simply posted online. And the name they've given the video? Melbourne doctors comply with TGA vaccine advertising guidelines, which of course we have just learnt is not the case. These are not the TGA vaccine advertising guidelines at all. And the channel they are posted on is called We Are Change Melbourne, and a quick look at some of the other videos posted on that particular YouTube channel certainly confirms that this is a conspiracy theory site and anti-vaxxer, including videos such as Vaccine Injury Awareness Vigil and interviews. Another video called We Are Change Talk Show. Man launches lawsuit against corrupt vaccine industry. And I think you get the idea. Another concerning thing is we don't know whether the people being filmed in the video, which includes receptionists at the doctor's clinic and a doctor himself, knew they were being filmed. Now, for the sake of the story, here is a very short excerpt from the video in question.
Hi, how are you going? Look, my name's Jeff. I'm here to inform you that this surgery is in breach of the TGA guidelines. Advertising vaccine posters is a violation of their rules and regulations. So I'm required to basically come in here and inform you of that. I brought in some documentation so you can get a further understanding. But I required these posters to be taken down immediately.
It's absolutely gobsmacking. Now, what's interesting is, of course, this person uses such conviction, bluster, and he speaks with such seeming authority that the video shows the clinic complying and taking down the vaccine posters. What's also very concerning are some of the comments appearing under the video on this YouTube channel, including, "This is the best. You have won the internet for 2019. Another one, "Excellent work. Thank you for this." Here's another one, "Bravo. It is clear that there is much confusion about the whole scheme, and it appears to me that the powers that be design it that way." Here's a concerning one. "Who else in Sydney wants to do this?" Another poor ignorant soul. "I have seen these in almost every doctor's office I've been to over the years. So are they all in violation?" Another one. Can you supply a link to the TGA section that would be easy to print out and take along? Another one. What do I need to take with me? Do I have to be involved with the TGA or ... I want to go down to my clinic and do the same thing with their disgusting flu vaccine during pregnancy advertising. So it is clear this video is encouraging people to do the same thing. Almost laughably pinned to the top of the comments from the channel itself, in no way did I impersonate a TGA representative. The raw footage proves this. Any statements alluding to the contrary are false and misleading. We Are Change Melbourne does not recommend impersonating a Commonwealth official. Well, We Are Change. I think that disclaimer is a little late. If you want to see the video for yourself, I will link to it in this week's show notes. And the word on the grapevine is this story is getting a lot of notice in the media. There should be more coming up, I think, in the next week about this. And I think it would be prudent for a warning to go out to every doctor's surgery, every clinic throughout Australia. So when people come in like this, blustering and appearing to represent the TGA, they can be stopped dead in their tracks. I'll keep you posted if there's any more developments on this story, and if any agency within the government or elsewhere decides to take action against this individual.
You told me that aliens really exist. You met them and swooned.
Sziasztok!
Всем привет!
Hejsan!
Have you ever wondered what skeptics are up to in countries where English is not necessarily the first language?
Or are you interested to learn about some fascinating and sometimes very bizarre Europe-related facts, events, or people from history of skepticism?
Or do you just want to know who's been really wrong lately?
You can find out all about that and more on the award-winning show, The ESP,
The European Skeptics Podcast. So, where can people find the show?
You can find it online at theesp.eu, but you can also follow us on Twitter at espodcast_EU or like us on Facebook. Oh, and you can contact the show by sending an email to info@theesp.eu. If you want to subscribe, do a quick search for the European Skeptics Podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get to your podcast.
The European Skeptics Podcast.
The real ESP experience.
One of us is deceived. You're driving me crazy, you're driving me crazy. I don't know how you can believe.
My friend and colleague Ian Bryce, a long-time member of the Australian Skeptics, has been involved in many investigations for the organisation spanning decades. Ian took part in a series of video interviews about the history of Australian skeptics, and here he is discussing some of the early investigations.
Okay, well, one of the big investigations we did was the water-powered car designed by Stephen Horvath in Queensland and promoted by the then Premier Joe Bjelke-Petersen, whom some of you might remember. And he was in the media pouring water from a jug into the petrol filler of his car and then going to drive away, only to discover he didn't have the keys with him. So I did a big investigation of that. He claimed to have patents on the subject, so I tracked down his patents and found out that the patents were not related to a car running on water. Surprise, surprise. Published the patents, extracts therefrom, in the Skeptic magazine, and described how A, it couldn't work from a theoretical basis, and B, the patent was irrelevant, and C, no one had witnessed him driving this car, verifying that it was on water. So that was a major investigation. There was a psychic dentist who toured Australia from the USA And his claim that he would provide surgery on your teeth and he would turn your amalgam fillings into gold. Guaranteed. So he's performed surgery on a lot of people in Melbourne, and the skeptics protested against him. And then finally it was discovered that he was telling the people, when he was holding public days to get them to come and promote his idea, that it would take 2 weeks for them to turn into gold. It wouldn't be instantaneous like he'd been suggesting before. And of course, within 2 weeks he'd done the surgery and was out of the country. It's very convenient. Another one was a psychic called Dennis Hassel, who said that he would appear on stage and would disappear in front of your very eyes. So he was claiming that you could see right through him. So the skeptics went along and watched it and found out that all he was doing was slipping between two curtains from the light into the dark. So he did indeed disappear. So the skeptics wrote an article saying we did concede that we could indeed see right through him. So it was a touch of humour as well. There was the Melbourne Metropolitan Board of Works in the early days. They hired a psychic from the USA, at least she came from the USA of her own accord, and then she proceeded to divine psychic buildings. In other words, she could find historical building sites around Melbourne with a divining rod. So she'd be driven around there with officials from the government, divining them, putting pegs in the ground, saying, here's where an ancient building was, and here's a sketch of the building. And they were paying her money for this, ratepayers' money. At the end of the day, we had to look at her sketches, and they were all of American-style buildings. So much for the colonial Australian buildings that she was finding. Another physics event was a psychic called Byron Rigby, who ran the Transcendental Meditation group, all sorts of yoga. He was also a mathematics professor somewhere, and he was claiming that he could levitate. He had pictures to prove it, of he and his students floating above a mattress in mid-air, maybe 2 feet above the mattress. And we were very sceptical of this, so we investigated that and he was unable to produce any evidence whatsoever that he could levitate. Some of his students said that, okay, if you sit cross-legged on a mattress, you can actually bounce up and down, a bit like on a trampoline. And they'd taken photographs when he was at the apogee of his trajectories. So it looked like he was floating in air. The Creation Science Foundation from Queensland went around Australia holding conferences to promote creationism. And they had found a guy who claimed to have scientific evidence that the speed of light was slowing down. Now, why was this important? Because if the speed of light was faster in the past, it would overcome the objection that light from distant galaxies takes billions of years to reach us. So how could it be that the universe was only 6,000 years old? Well, his thesis showed, his claim, that the speed of light was much higher in the past, so it could travel all that distance, like 1 billion light years, in only 6,000 years, and the Bible could be true after all. So I gathered some data on his measurements. He published a thing called a monograph, which I think is a self-published scientific paper on that topic. So I took his data and found out the source data and wrote a little paper showing that he had selected his data. And the evidence that the speed of light was slowing down was achieved simply by selecting the earlier measurements which were less accurate, the higher ones in their range, and the current ones low evidence in their range, which showed it slowing down by 1 or 2% in the last 100 years. So I went to the Creation Conference to heckle. Now I've taken several different lines of action against psychics and charlatans. The best thinking is that you go along and you observe and you report. Well, that might be okay, but it's not very satisfying on the day. So you can ask questions at the end. But if I find there's skeptics in the audience, then the question period vanishes altogether or becomes very short. So the only option is to maybe stand outside and speak to people, or sometimes you can heckle. So I don't often do it, but I have been known to heckle or to interject with a question when it's really needed. And if that doesn't work, another way is to simply give a belly laugh. which I find very effective as well. So anyway, Barry Setterfield was at the front of the conference reading out his paper that the speed of light had slowed down and Genesis could be right. And then the light bulb on his podium that he was reading, on his lectern, reading his paper from, went out. So they hunted around trying to find a torch for him to read his notes by. So I yelled out, "Looks like the speed of light is slowing down as we speak." So that's the sort of way one can perhaps get publicity. Your psychic surgery is something that we were involved in the 1980s as well. As you know, that's where a surgeon, so-called surgeon, probably from the Philippines, pretends to do an operation on a person and pretends to remove some innards from them and declare them cured and zip up their stomach again so there's no evidence. Well, as Tim described, we gave a demonstration of that at a convention in Sydney, which showed how it could be done. And then there's a magazine called Australian Playboy who said they'd like to do an article on it, and did we have some photographs of psychic surgery being performed. They weren't happy with... Sorry?
Did they have their clothes on?
We didn't have our photographs they weren't happy with, so they said, well, we're a bit flexible here, perhaps you can have some tomorrow. You can create some. So I was given the task of doing some fake psychic surgery by the skeptics to provide them with photographs which we were led to believe they would then publish as the skeptics showing how psychic surgery can be done. So I started to do some psychic surgery on a Melbourne committee member, Joe Rubinstein, and he was as skinny as a rake. So do you think I could create an appropriate fold of fat on his stomach to get my hands inside? No way, I couldn't do it. So we decided Mark Plummer was better endowed with a layer of body fat, and I did the surgery on him, producing chicken guts from the incision and with appropriate guidance from magicians and so forth. So that was carefully filmed by Australian Penthouse magazine and was published in the magazine. But the problem is they forgot that it was done by Australian skeptics, and they said it was photographs of psychic surgery being performed in the Philippines. So my hands, I can say that I'm a hand model for Australian Penthouse magazine, and I was published there doing this psychic surgery, but not given credit for it because the credit was given to the real psychic surgeons, so-called.
So that was let's just get that right. That was Penthouse or Playboy? Because at the beginning
it was
you said
Australian Penthouse.
It was Penthouse, okay. You can see that interview for yourself by following the link on this week's show notes, plus interviews with Barry Williams, Peter Hogan, Tim Mendham, and one of the founders of Australian Skeptics, Dick Smith.
On the 10th of November 2009, in the basement function room of a Glasgow pub, an underage student with overgrown ginger hair by the name of Ian Scott hosted the first ever Glasgow Skeptics event. The speaker that night was the founding member of Edinburgh Skeptics, Ash Price. The event was well attended and enthusiasm grew for this plucky new organisation. Under Ian's stewardship, they went from strength to strength, hosting talks from luminaries in science and free thinking such as Aaron Ra, Chris French, Simon Singh, Susan Gerbic, John Curtis, Rebecca Watson, Eugenie Scott, and, as a special 5-year anniversary event, Nate Phelps. If you're unfamiliar with Nate, he was the atheist son of fundamentalist hate preacher Fred Phelps. Nate's father had died not long before that appearance at Strathclyde University, and his talk was an unforgettable one for everyone there. In 2016, just before the Scottish independence referendum, the group organised one of the largest public debates in Scotland. They had to turn people away from the 400 plus capacity Mitchell Library Theatre they'd hired for the event. Ian left shortly after this to work for Humanists UK, and the group is now managed by me, Brian Eggle. Since taking over, we made a bold and somewhat naive decision to increase the frequency of the events. So now, if you're ever in Glasgow on a Monday night and have nothing to do, please check out Glasgow Skeptics, as we will have some form of science and skepticism on the menu for you. To celebrate our 10th anniversary and event number 276, we welcome back Ash Price for his critically acclaimed Paranormal Illusionist show. To continue the celebrations, we'll be hosting atheist luminary Matt Dillahunty for his Magic and Skepticism talk back at Strathclyde University on Monday the 16th of December. Free tickets are available from glasgowskeptics.com. As we move into next year, we're going to pass another milestone, 300 events. So please, raise a glass to Glasgow Skeptics and remember to support your local skeptics group or start one up if you don't have one.
Two microphones.
I need two microphones, folks. Hello, my name's Richard Saunders. I'm a past President Life member of the Australian Skeptics Inc. here in New South Wales. I've just come back from a few days in Melbourne to chat to the people down there who are organising Skepticon 2019. It's going to be at the University of Melbourne from the 6th to the 8th of December, and it's lining up to be a really interesting and fascinating convention, which I hope they always are. The people down there are putting in a lot of work, but one of the highlights of every year for the Australian Skeptics is the awarding of the Bent Spoon Prize for the most preposterous piece of paranormal or pseudoscientific piffle in the previous years. I thought I might like to tell you that this year, amongst the nominations, we have SBS Television for Medicine or Myth. Boo. Boo. Oh, good, okay. You don't have to boo everybody, it's all right. We've got Good Price Pharmacy. Pharmacies often come up for selling things like homeopathy and whatnot. We've got one of my favourite ones coming up is Peter the Rainmaker Stevens. I'll get to that in a second. ABC Landline, the University of Technology Sydney, SBS again for another program, even Four Corners. Aldi Supermarkets. Oh, that's what I say. Oh. I mean, I go there twice a week. I line up for the specials, which I see on my Aldi TV every week. While I'm eating my Aldi dinner, they were selling ear candles. Ear candles. And for those who don't know, these are candles you stick into your ear. True enough. And also the Prime Minister's got a Bent Spoon nomination this year. But I must say, normally every year the Australian Skeptics themselves, we get a nomination for the Bent Spoon. But I thought I might quickly like to tell you about the one that I find very interesting. Nominee, Peter the Rainmaker Stevens. Peter Stevens has been promoting his atmospheric ionisation research machine throughout Australia. This is a 2-metre diameter portable device, thank heavens for that uses focused mirrors, infrared energy and magnets, just in case one didn't work, they've got all sorts of things, to create an intense warm section of air that changes particles in the atmosphere, causing clouds to form and rain. It is alleged that when this device is turned on, it will create rain with 100% accuracy. Why hasn't he been using it lately is the cry I hear over here.
Where will it produce rain?
Stevens has been encouraging people to use his device in rural areas of Australia that may be subject to drought to help bring rain to parched lands. Well, despite this device never having undergone any kind of rigorous scientific testing and has been dismissed as implausible by the Bureau of Meteorology. And somebody earlier on asked me, said, well, why isn't it being used? Well, it doesn't work. It's probably... Anyway, if you're coming to the convention, you can hear the announcement of the Bent Spoon and other awards there in person, or it'll be broadcast just after. But the Bent Spoon is something we've been doing ever since the Skeptics have been going, I think, Tim.
Yep.
For nearly 40 years. And if you have someone or something or an organisation you would like to nominate for the Bent Spoon Award, you can do that by contacting us, having a chat to us, or doing it through the website. Too late. For next year. For next year. But we'll always look forward to the Bent Spoon Prize. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You know what some of our amendments are.
Hola, les habla Paula desde la hermosa ciudad de Buenos Aires, en Argentina. Cuando escuchamos podcasts, escuchamos los mismos que escucha todo el mundo, como The Skeptic Zone. Ojalá puedan venir a visitarnos algún día. Los esperamos con nuestras riquísimas comidas locales y hasta podemos ir a bailar un tango. Mientras tanto, sigan disfrutando de su dosis semanal de ciencia y pensamiento racional. ¡Chao!
Now, you've been enjoying, and I've been enjoying, Tim Mendham on the Skeptic Zone with his freedom of speech article, the one about the geeks and the nerds. And last week, you would have heard part one of Hole in the Pole. And this week, we're going to be hearing about part two. How do you get these stories, Tim?
Oh, I make them up.
You make them up, right? That makes sense.
I'm a journalist. That's my training. So basically, research, talking to people, going online, talking on the phone, interviewing people, whatever, gathering information, and of course generally being inspired by your work, Richard, which is always inspirational. Folks, you would not understand. It really is. But no, it's fun, actually, doing research. I enjoy doing research and that sort of thing, yeah.
And just for curiosity's sake, folks, Tim did come round to the Skeptic Zone studios, sat down, and we had the nice microphone, and actually it was a good session, despite the odd plane flying over and the cats meowing and your tummy rumbling and all sorts of things.
It was the glamorous studios, wasn't it?
Very glamorous studios.
Yeah, they're really high-tech and very impressive, actually. Hot and cold running staff everywhere. So it's actually, I was very impressed with it, with a multi-million-dollar operation. I shouldn't say that because you're still after our patrons, aren't you?
I am. It's all a lie. We did it in my lounge room, I think. Yeah.
And the smell of an oily rag.
And the smell of an oily rag. But no, and I'll tell you that we get correspondence at the Skeptic Zone, not an avalanche, but I've been getting people writing in to compliment you on your stories. People find them quite interesting, quite fighting words. The one about freedom of speech people found interesting.
I've got a very large family. Well, that's nice to hear, actually. It's always nice to get feedback. I mean, normally the sort of feedback you get is when those people who don't like you tell you, very, very readily tell you, and those who do say, oh, yeah, fair enough. So, and I've known this, as I say, I've been a journalist for more years than I care to admit to, and editor of publications. And I know that getting feedback from listeners or readers or whatever is really, really valuable even if it's critical, especially if it's critical, actually, that you learn to sort of adjust what you're doing, your product, to not necessarily match everything they say, but at least to take it on board.
Yeah.
And so I've always welcomed, in the magazine, which I edit, I'm sure you do too, on the podcast, always welcome input all the time.
Well, it was a good point. In fact, listeners, if you fancy yourself to be a bit of a writer on skeptical issues, you always would welcome people to write in and say, how about this for an idea, or here's a story you might like?
Yeah, I mean, all the time. I mean, sort of contributors are worth gold to editors, especially contributors who don't ask for any money.
I know.
Because we always pay our writers in round figures. But no, it's always, I mean, the best thing to do is to just send me an email to editor@skeptics.com.au to actually just put forward an idea, pitch an idea in a sentence or three, and I'm very happy to discuss it and we work it out. It's best to do that first rather than write something and send it in, because you might find you've actually overlapped with something you've already done. And that happens a lot with book reviews, actually. And I said, thank you very much, you spent a lot of time doing that. Unfortunately, we published a book review on the same book last issue. So check it first, but always welcome, always more than welcome, actually. So, yeah, it'd be great to hear. Even if you like articles that are critical of the skeptics, that's fine. I don't mind that at all. I think that's very healthy to have. But on a wide range of topics, and have a look at the magazine, which is also available online. And in fact, all the issues. We're the only skeptical group in the world to publish all of its issues online for free, except for the 4 most recent issues, which we say for subscribers. So you can look at the very earliest copies of the magazine. So that came out in 1981, a massive 4-pager. But ever since then, so go have a look. There's a plethora of information and ideas, and I draw on that information as you do.
Oh, yeah.
Quite a lot. It's a good resource.
It really is, folks. Thousands of articles, reports, items, investigations, interviews, free to download, as we like to say. Well, thanks, Tim. And now we can all sit back and enjoy you reading The Hole in the Pole, Part 2.
Hi, I'm Tim Mendham. I'm the Executive Officer of Australian Skeptics and the editor of our magazine, The Skeptic. This is part 2 of The Hole in the Pole, which appeared in the March 2018 issue of the magazine, which is volume 38, number 1. You can actually look this up on our website and download it if you like. In part 1, we looked at the basic theories that there's something beneath us, holes, underground, that sort of thing. And we looked at the adventures of Rear Admiral Byrd, who claimed to have actually flown into a hole in the pole and met up with Nazis and people who had an altruistic view of the world. This time, though, we look at something a little bit more scientific, and it is photos that have been published which supposedly show a hole in the pole. Specifically, this time, the North Pole. Now, as every hole seeker knows, cover-ups by governments and secret cabals have made it impossible, not to mention downright dangerous, to reveal the existence of the holes and the civilizations inside the hollow earth that they lead to. So when government agencies release information by accident or naivety that should otherwise be kept from the public, the holers leap on it with unbridled enthusiasm, and truth goes out the window, or down a hole. Thus it was with the release of photos of the Earth in the late 60s from the US Environmental Science Services Administration, ESSA, meteorological satellites. ESSA was the United States federal executive created in 1965 as part of the reorganisation of the Department of Commerce. Its mission was to unify and oversee the meteorological, climatological, hydrographic and geodesic operations of the United States. It operated until 1970, when it was replaced by the new National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. It was the first US government organisation with the word environment in its title, and as such was the first such organisation chartered to study the global natural environment as a whole, bringing together the study of the oceans with that of both the atmosphere, in the lower atmosphere, and the ionosphere. The publication of photos from 2 of its satellites, ESSA 3 and 7, set in motion a new series of hollow Earth conspiracy theories. The ESSA 3 photograph was taken on January 6, 1967, and the second photograph was taken by ESSA 7 on November 23, 1968, so roughly almost 2 years. They show the northern region of the Earth from above, looking down with the polar region in the middle. Except, instead of any land, clouds or whatever, there is nothing in the middle, just a large black spot, or a hole. Robert E. Mcilwain, who died in 2008, was one of the people who hopped on this with great vigour. He was a self-described Bachelor of Science in Physics who wrote a series of ranting, fringe science essays characteristically peppered with capitalised words for emphasis. Each essay covered topics such as alien influence on violence, free energy, the coming UFO landings, and cancer cures. As the site Pop Martian describes him, Robert Mcilwain became one of the most famous net legends during his tenure on Usenet, generating enough fame and interest to rate an FAQ of his own and his own news group. Originally appearing on science groups and eventually posting to almost every news group in existence, Mcilwain would post long messages about a number of subjects on a regular monthly or semi-monthly basis. These posts were almost always the same, with no changes made from the previous editions, and he never cross-posted, making it impossible for most newsreader programs to realise that the message had already been read. Robert's messages always ended with the sentence, "Unaltered reproduction and dissemination of this important information is encouraged." Now, every second word is in caps, so that I think. In his typical arch-conspiracist style, he posted the following when he saw the first ESA photo. "The Earth is hollow. Its hollow shell is about 1,500 miles thick at the equator and about 500 miles thick near the polar entrance holes. The North Polar entrance hole is about 1,400 miles in diameter and centred close to the Earth's axis of rotation, while the South Polar entrance hole is slightly smaller, perhaps 1,300 miles in diameter, and somewhat off-centre. The entrance holes are usually filled up with some kind of fog. As the geometric centre of the Earth is a glowing ball of plasma about 600 miles in diameter, which serves as the central sun that warms and illuminates the Earth's inner surface." Sean Ellis on his website moteprime.org points out that Mcilwain's caption includes the words "clearly showing the hole at the North Pole." If this is indeed the case, then it is nothing short of remarkable, as the North Pole is in complete darkness at this time of year. So spotting a hole in darkness is difficult. There are other things about these photographs that raise problems, Ellis says. Not just the hole, but the entire visible hemisphere of the Earth is in sunlight. Clearly impossible unless the pole is oriented directly towards the sun. This is not, of course, the case. At no time during January 1967 was the entire northern hemisphere simultaneously bathed in sunlight. The answer, of course, is that the photos are composites, montages produced from a number of separate half-lit images to give a measure of global cloud cover. The hole only appears when that area is in winter darkness, allied to the angle of inclination of the satellite taking the images. During summer months, when the area is well lit, there is no hole. But that doesn't stop conspiracy theorists, of course. As recently as 2016, a group called Secure Team 10 posted a video on YouTube with never-before-seen pictures of the alleged hole. Apart from the ESA photographs, one of the never-before-seen photographs was published in 1972. It shows North America and has been readily available on the net ever since there was a net to look at. Nevertheless, Secure Team 10, which sounds more impressive than it is, at one point in the video they referred to the Arctic as the Antarctic, claims a cover-up because every single satellite image that we have of the North Pole shows a massive hole or a blackout hole put there to hide whatever's underneath. That's not even close to being true. But what's a bit of absurd hyperbole between friends? The photo in question was taken in 1972 by Ken Mattingly, a member of the crew of Apollo 16. And if you go onto the NASA site, you can get this photo very easily. Just look up Ken Mattingly and photo of the Earth. As the online caption for the photo says, AS 161181888 16th April 1972, a good view of Earth photographed about 1.5 hours after translunar injection on April 16, 1972. Although there is much cloud cover, the United States, in large part, most of Mexico, and some parts of Central America are clearly visible. Note Lake Michigan and Lake Superior and the Bahamas banks. See different shade of blue below Florida. Just beginning man's 5th lunar landing mission were astronauts John W. Young, Commander Thomas K. Mattingly II, Command Module Pilot, and Charles M. Duke, Jr., Lunar Module Pilot. While astronauts Young and Duke descended in the lunar module Orion to explore the Descartes Highlands region of the Moon, astronaut Mattingly remained with the command and service modules Casper in lunar orbit. That's when he was taking the photos. The photo shows cloud cover with an interesting circle, yes, let's call it a hole, in the top left. One other conspiracy theorist site published this photo and another one that was very similar. So similar, in fact, that it's incredible that they didn't realise that they'd simply turned the first photo through 90 degrees. 2 photos, same photo. The video, despite being more than 40 years late with its startling revelations, received wide publicity in the tabloid and digital tabloid press. None of those media outlets seem to have checked to see if the photo really was secret, never before seen, or even recent. and they certainly didn't seem to want to find out what the hole was. This turned out to be a problem, as while the top-secret photo is published everywhere, it is hard to find an explanation of the hole, or even an acknowledgement of its existence. NASA does not seem to have published a rebuttal of the hole's claim. The fact that the claim is stupid might be a good reason not to bother, but it would be nice to have an explanation to offer in response to the conspiracy nuts. Enter the skeptical meteorologist. Steve Simons is a long-time skeptic in New South Wales, an experienced meteorologist, so as often happens in skeptical circles, he readily gave a clear explanation. But you do have to listen closely to this one. He says, air rises at the equator and sinks back to Earth at around 30 degrees north and south, and some of that flows back to the equator at the surface as the trade winds. Air also rises in the vicinity of the polar front at about 50 degrees north and south. Some of that moves towards the equator and sinks to 30 degrees north and south with the equatorial air and flows back towards the pole at the surface, producing the westerlies. Air rising at the polar front also moves towards the pole and sinks back to the surface at the poles. This creates a belt of low pressure around the equator, a belt of high pressure around 30 degrees, a belt of low pressure around 50 degrees, and high pressure again at the poles. High pressure areas have descending air. Cloud does not form in descending air, and with no cloud you get no rain. All the world's major deserts lie along the subtropical ridge, the belt of high pressure around 30 degrees, and also under the highs at the poles. The Antarctic and Arctic are deserts. If you have an ocean surrounded by land, as you do in the Arctic, you will get widespread cloud over the land areas, but where you have descending air over the ocean, you will get no cloud at all. The symmetrical nature of the flow of air around the Arctic means that the cloud-free area will be virtually circular, exactly as you see it in the photo. The polar night vortex, Steve says, is a jet stream that circles the poles at around 10,000 metres. It tends to separate the air over the pole from the subpolar regions and could help produce the clean edge to the cloud. But there is no need to worry about it. The simple explanation of a high-pressure system, descending air, and therefore no cloud explains the hole in the pole well enough. Meteorologists 1, conspiracy theories 0. That's part 2 of this article. Part 3 will actually look at some of the people who want to go there. I look forward to talking to you then.
Skepticon 2019, the Australian Skeptics National Convention. One of the highlights of this year's convention is the regulatory panel discussion. Could Australian regulators better protect consumers from misleading and dangerous advertising of products making therapeutic claims? The panel will be chaired by Ken Harvey, the president of Friends of Science in Medicine. Joining Ken will be Nicholas Hayes, Deputy General Manager, Enforcement Coordination, Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, Basha Duke, Head of Undergraduate Courses and the Head, Quality and Innovation, of the Medical Education Research and Quality Unit at the School of Public Health and Preventative Medicine, Monash University, John Skerritt, Deputy Secretary for Health Products Regulation, Australian Department of Health, Paulina Steslich, Research Fellow and Evidence-Based Practice Professional Unit Coordinator at the Centre for Research in Evidence-Based Practice at Bond University, President of the Gold Coast Skeptics, Julie Woods, Discipline Leader, Nutrition, Institute for Physical Activity and Nutrition, School of Exercise and Nutrition Sciences, Deakin University, and Mal Vickers, Master of Public Health, student at the School of Public Health and Preventative Medicine, Monash University. The panel will be on Saturday, the 7th of December from 11 o'clock. For more information and to get your tickets, visit www.skepticon.org.au. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. Now, I hope to meet you at Skepticon 2019, not many weeks away now in Melbourne. Still tickets available if you go to skepticon.org.au. You can certainly buy your tickets now. Lots of chances to meet your favourite skeptical speakers, including the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe and lots of other prominent speakers. And who knows, you might even get to meet the one and only Maynard. And thank you again to the people who are Patreons and PayPal subscribers. Of course, nobody has to be to listen to the show. And I think it's marvellous that some people choose to be. They choose to be. There's no premium content with the Skeptic Zone. You don't pay extra to get extra show. You get the show anyway. And if you so desire, you can chip in $5 or $10 a month via PayPal or Patreon at skepticzone.tv, or make a one-off contribution. It means the show keeps on air, on the internet, in the internet. You know what I mean. Well, Maud the cat's come back with me to the studio. She's looking out the window because for some reason, I'll just open the studio window. Hang on. You pick up the microphone, maybe you can hear. We've been invaded by rainbow lorikeets. It's that sort of day. While the rainbow lorikeets circle around. There goes one now. This is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation. Hello to the people who keep listening after the end of the music. We haven't done this for a few weeks. This is the part of the show, if you're new to this, where I roll a 10-sided die this week. Sometimes it's 6-sided, sometimes it's different. 20-sided. Today it's 10-sided. I'll roll it 3 times. And you use your psychic predicting powers. Oh, hello, it's Maud. She's back. Here. This is her toy mouse. Come on. Hup. Sometimes she leaps backwards to get that mouse. Yeah, this is where you use your predicting powers to see if you can predict what numbers will come up. So I'm going to put it in a little container here. There we go. Shut the container. Give it a rattle. And here comes the first number. 8. Mark that on your scorecards, folks. 8. Predict the next number. Here it comes. 4. 4 is the next number. Last number coming up. 3. 8, 4, and 3. Hey, if you're coming to Skepticon in a couple of weeks' time, say hello, and I might even have a Skeptic Zone 10-sided die for you.